At a class reunion, Ella's ex-boyfriend stained my haute couture suit, and he hurriedly apologized. "I'm sorry. I'll pay for it. My husband bought this outfit at an auction last year for $1 million. Ella smiled lightly, responding with an air of nonchalance. Denis immediately slumped to the ground, his face turning pale. "Damn. $1 million for a piece of clothing. Manager Ella is impressive. Some people must be regretting it to death. Didn't he later end up with a rich woman? Didn't even get $1 million? A gold digger would be more like it. Right now, he probably couldn't even scrape together that much by working at nightclub." Everyone laughed exaggerated. I looked on with mixed feelings at the ex who had abandoned Ella. He happened to raise his head and met my gaze, his eyes filled with embarrassment and unwillingness. Earlier, in the restroom, he had suddenly blocked my way and said lightly yet firmly, "Do you believe that as long as I want to, I can just crook my finger and she'll come to me like a dog?" Now, he had intentionally spilled red wine on me to get closer to Ella, creating the current situation. I wasn't really surprised by his behavior. After all, Ella was now a powerful woman worth over $10 billion, active in financial magazines. If Denis hadn't married someone else back then, he would have been the one accompanying Ella through thick and thin. I just felt a bit indignant for Ella because of his words. Ella intertwined her fingers with mine, coldly looking at Denis. "If you're in trouble, maybe you could ask your ex-wife in prison for help." Denis clenched his fingers, his lips trembling as he feigned calmness. "I'll pay you back." Ella simply smiled. "If you can't do it, you shouldn't promise so easily, Denis." Her tone was clearly cold, but I felt a bit dazed hearing it. I had seen Ella start from nothing, struggling in both her poverty and her ambition. I'd never seen her treat someone so poorly in front of so many people. As a result, everyone laughed even more heartily. Only I noticed that while she seemed to be humiliating him, her gaze never left him. After being together for 5 years, Ella rarely mentioned her past. When we went back to her hometown to get some things and accidentally dug up a photo from her cabinet. It was a photo of a handsome young man with a brilliant smile. Ella was usually calm, but at that moment, she seemed lost for a long time, a trace of loneliness flashing in her eye. I held back my discomfort and casually asked, "Is he your ex-boyfriend?" "Yeah." I watched her expression Leslie tear the photo to shreds and toss it into the trash can, feeling uncontrollable chill and agitation in my heart. I left directly, and that day marked the first time we had a Cold War in 5 years. That night, after taking a shower, Ella hugged me from behind and sighed softly. "For I was at my most difficult starting out. He took my company's most critical technology and went to the rival company, even marrying the boss's daughter. On the day of his wedding, my mother went to see him but had a car accident on the way, nearly not making it. And he went abroad with his wife the next day. Christ. I really hated him back then." I silently stared at her calm expression in the mirror. Ella didn't know that I went back later. I watched her pick Denis's photo out of the trash can, her eyes red, carefully gluing the pieces back together. The party soon reached its conclusion. Suddenly someone shouted, "We should help out a classmate in need. How about we crowdfund for Denis?" As soon as those words came out, Denis's expression changed, and he looked helplessly at Ella. Ella squeezed my hand tighter, almost digging into my palm. "Ella?" It wasn't until I reminded her in displeasure that she finally realized and released my hand. I looked at the marks left on my hand, a chill running through me. The troublemaker giggled, sneaking glances at Ella's reaction. And seeing that she didn't oppose the idea, they quickly began calling out bids. $5. This was once the campus heartthrob, the dream guy of so many girls. "Can't you be a bit more generous?" "I'll donate 20. One after another. People started bidding, the atmosphere becoming unprecedentedly lively. It felt as if they were treating Denis like a commodity at an auction or like fish in a market, ready to be slaughtered. Denis's face turned pale as paper, his eyes reddening, but he remained silent. Ella silently watched his expression, which seemed devoid of hope. In the end, when everyone gleefully handed him the donated 100 yuan and chained, he just stared blankly and said, "Thank you." People couldn't believe it. He really accepted it? And now living like a beggar, Denis ignored them, holding the money in his hands, and walked up to Ella, adopting a posture of abject humility. Here's 100 yuan, Manager Ella. Can I have some more time for the rest? This humble demeanor was a stark contrast to the proud young man I had seen in the photo. There was a moment of silence among the crowd, exchanging glances. Have we gone a bit too far? He hasn't had it easy these past few years. Ella remained silent, staring at him. My chest suddenly felt tight with pain, easily seeing through her indifferent exterior to the trace of annoyance underneath. She hoped for Denis to fall into the mud, wanting to trample his dignity underfoot. Yet when the moment truly arrived, feeling discomfort at accepting charity, was it discomfort or heartache? In that stunned moment, someone suddenly shouted at us in fear, "Get back! The lamp is going to fall." I instinctively looked up and saw the chandelier above swaying precariously, seemingly about to drop at any moment, and the three of us were standing directly underneath it. Ella, I reached out to pull her away, but saw Ella suddenly lunge toward Denis. My head instantly buzzed. Then my arm was grabbed and yanked, causing me to stumble in the opposite direction. Next, the chandelier fell, crashing down with a loud noise, and shards flew everywhere. A sharp pain shot through my lower leg. There was a long cut on my ankle from a shard, but I seemed to no longer feel the pain. I just sat on the floor, dazed while staring at the two people in front of me embracing. Whispers surrounded us. The moonlight outside and the subtle glances from others fell upon me, cold as white frost, until the person who saved me asked with concern, "Sir, are you okay?" I saw Ella freeze suddenly. She pushed Denis away and came over to check my injured ankle carefully. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were behind me just now." Denis also walked over, his voice soft and mixed with a strange emotion. "Thank you for saving me earlier." Ella ignored him and looked at me intently. "Christ, I truly didn't know you were under the chandelier." I silently avoided her touch. Ella stared at me for a moment before directly pulling me toward the door. "Ella?" Denis chased after us. Ella had a cold expression, clearly unwilling to say much to him. 3 months. 1 million must be transferred to my husband's account. But Denis suddenly, throwing a provocative glance my way. "Thank you for giving me an extension. I'll definitely pay you back on time." Once we got home, Ella couldn't wait to help me apply ointment and then close the bedroom door, standing on her tiptoes to kiss me. All the frustration I had bottled up that night suddenly exploded at that moment, and I pushed her away. "The wedding next Saturday is cancelled. Let's break up." Ella paused momentarily while unbuttoning my shirt. "Why?" All I could think about were the comments made by her classmates during the incident. When someone encounters an accident, their first reaction is always the most genuine. Isn't it telling that Ella threw herself toward Denis? Yeah. Indifference and harsh words are acts of revenge. Caring and protecting are signs of subconscious love. I asked Ella, "You still like him, don't you?" "The first person you rushed to save was him, because you care more about him than you do about me. I saw the last time. I saw you glued his photo together. Since you never forgot him, why be with me?" "No." She looked at me, her brow slightly furrowed, but her own was certain. "He betrayed me back then, and my mother also lost her sanity because of him. All these years, I've been hating him. The moment the accident happened, even if he wasn't by my side, I would instinctively rush to save anyone. Hating him is one thing, life and death is another. But I really didn't know you were behind me. If I had, I would have prioritized you. Giving him 3 months is because I saw someone recording on their phone. As for that photo, the doctor suddenly called me that day and told me that past memories could stimulate my mother's brain. So I wanted to try it with that photo." Ella held my hand. "Christ, you understand me, right?" When I didn't respond, she sighed helplessly and slowly kissed me. "Christ, I love you now." Her tone was candid and unreserved. "Don't say anything about breaking up again. It makes me sad." In the dim light, Ella wore a red silk dress, the straps slipping down to reveal her fair and alluring collarbone. Her eyes were as black as night, free of any impurities. As she wrapped her arms around my neck and asked softly, "Is that okay?" The air conditioning in the room was set low, yet I was sweating profusely in the cold air. The atmosphere was just right. Suddenly, the bedroom door swung open with a bang. Ella, big ass brought me back from my chaotic thoughts. I instinctively looked over. Denis stood in the doorway, pale and staring blankly at us. I almost immediately sat up and grabbed a blanket to cover Ella and me. It was absurd. Clearly, I was Ella's fiancé. Yet under Denis's accusing gaze, I felt like a third party having an affair. Once we were both dressed and walked into the living room, Ella fixed her gaze on Denis. "What are you doing here?" Denis stared back, his eyes filled with disbelief and grievance. "I walked into the wrong room. I'm sorry. Get out." Clark, Ella's younger brother, followed Denis behind him, shielding him. "Sis, I brought Denis here. There are many people at his house pressuring him for money, and I was afraid it wasn't safe, so I brought him here to stay for a while." Ella's face turned cold. "Clark, do you know what you're doing?" Clark's eyes flickered. "This is also my home. Do I not have the right to shelter my friend?" "Denis, don't be afraid. You're staying here from now on. No one can drive you away. In my heart, you're my brother-in-law." He provocatively shot a glance at me. I found it ridiculous. My irritation only grew stronger. Ignoring him, I turned to Denis. "You're afraid of people coming to your house for debt collection. But have you ever thought about the fact that you owe me $1 million? Or are you here to repay me today?" I pulled out the payment code. "Okay. Then pay me back now." "Enough." Clark raised his hand, slapping my phone to the ground. He turned to Ella, his eyes complicated. "Sis, I know you hate Denis, but everything has its reasons. Do you know what happened back then?" Denis seemed to regain his composure and suddenly grabbed Clark's arm. His eyes reddened, pleading, "Don't say it." For a moment, no one spoke, until Ella suddenly asked. But before Clark could say anything, Denis suddenly fainted. "Denis has low blood sugar. Let him stay here tonight." I couldn't figure out what Ella was thinking, neither agreeing nor opposing. In the end, I self-deprecatingly smiled and turned to leave. Half an hour later, Ella returned to the bedroom. "What are you doing? Since there's a new male master here, I'll step aside." "Christ." I explained it. "Denis and I can never." I interrupted her. "But didn't you waver just now? Can you guarantee that you won't be affected by him?" Ella, however, was resolute. Even if he had his reasons, the fact that he abandoned me to be with someone else is real. And the fact that my mother has become like this because of him is also real. The damage has been done. He no longer has the right to seek my forgiveness. Denis woke up just now, and I told him he must leave by tomorrow morning. Clark too. This is our home. Since he doesn't accept you as his brother-in-law, then he can leave with Denis. "Sorry, darling." Ella buried her head in my neck, nuzzling against me like a spoiled child. "Making you sad is my fault." In the middle of the night, I was awoken by thunder. Groggily turning over, I found the space beside me empty. Ella was gone. I searched the entire house but couldn't find her anywhere. I called her several times, but she didn't answer. The rain was pouring harder, and in my panic, I suddenly remembered a place I hadn't checked. I ran to the guest room where Denis was sleeping. I could hear the faint sound of a man's heavy breathing coming from inside. My mind went blank. I trembled as I pushed the door, but found it was locked from the outside. "My sister and Denis are inside." I jerked them and locked the door, Clark said, walking over in his slippers. "They've missed out on too many years. I need to correct these mistakes for my sister's happiness." I felt a rush of anger and couldn't help but slap Clark across the face. "Clark, if anything happens, I will call the police." I then found the key, and with a click, the door opened. My heart was in my throat. I didn't know whether to be relieved or not. The scene before me wasn't as terrible as I'd imagined. Denis was huddled in the corner, his face flushed and his hair messy. "Ella, don't worry about me. I know you haven't forgiven me. I don't want you to regret it." And his pained expression was hard to ignore. Ella stood stiffly by the bed, her back to the door, and I couldn't see her expression. Ella. When she saw me, I rushed to her side and found that she was fully dressed, as if nothing was wrong. I trembled as I asked, "Are you okay?" Ella shook her head, seeming to remember something. She looked at me seriously and explained. Clark tricked me into coming here and locked me in with Denis. But I didn't drink the drugged drink. So nothing happened between us. That meant only Denis had been drugged. My mind was in turmoil, and just as I was about to speak, my arm was suddenly grabbed. This is all your fault. It worked for you. They would have reconciled long ago. Clark lunged at me to hit me. I couldn't take it anymore and retaliated, slapping him again. Are you crazy? Clark looked at me in disbelief and turned to Ella. Sister, he actually hit me. I'm your brother. When he saw Ella looking coldly at him, a flicker of panic crossed his face. Christ, my sister doesn't love you at all. How can you be so shameless and cling to her? I was so furious that I laughed. You drugged your sister and your ex-boyfriend, locking them in a room together. And you have the nerve to talk about shame? Clark's gaze shifted nervously. Denis didn't do it on purpose. Enough. Ella suddenly spoke, her tone and expression icy. No matter what reason he has, I don't want to hear it anymore. Clark's face paled. You will regret this. Ella remained unfazed. You'd better not show up at my wedding with Christ next week. We don't welcome you. In the end, the ambulance took Denis away. As he left, he spoke softly. Ella, whether you believe it or not, I never meant to hurt you. Ella took my hand, her face betraying no emotion. I told her that I wanted to reconsider the wedding. She didn't reject me outright but said earnestly, Christ, no matter what, never leave me. I muted everyone's messages and went on a solo trip to clear my head. I didn't expect a sudden earthquake to hit the area, even more unexpectedly. Ella, ignoring the danger of aftershocks, rushed over to me. I hadn't been injured, but she had been hit on the arm by a falling side and required 6 stitches. Seeing my anxious expression, she endured the pain and comforted me. Fortunately, if it were my face, it wouldn't look good for our wedding. Although she spoke in a joking tone, her expression was serious and resolute when it came to marriage. I stared at her for a long time, sighed deeply. Then you'd better hurry and heal, or you'll be in bandages on the wedding day. She froze for a moment, her eyes shining brightly with hope. Okay. As the wedding date approached, I was overwhelmed with preparation. On the day of the wedding dress fitting, I received a call from Denis. I knew Clark had drugged them. I drank it on purpose. He said a lot more, threatening me that if I didn't return Ella to him, he would commit suicide. I genuinely thought he was crazy. Coldly, I replied, then go die. After that, he never called again. Until the wedding day. When someone sent me an anonymous text, want to bet that you won't be able to get married today. The confident tone sounded like a simple statement of fact. Clearly, it was from Denis. I felt inexplicably annoyed. It wasn't just because of the text. I noticed that Ella seemed off today. Bride, do you take this man? The officiant asked for the 4th time, and I saw Ella snap out of her daze. After a moment of silence, I felt a bit dazed. Was she having second thoughts? Suddenly, Ella's phone rang, and her expression changed slightly. It seemed she knew who was calling but didn't answer. The phone kept ringing. During the segment reminiscing about sweet memories, the photos and music we had prepared inexplicably disappeared, and a familiar face appeared on the big screen. Clark. I suddenly had a bad feeling. The next moment, Clark's panicked voice echoed throughout the waiting venue. Sis, Denis is missing. Everyone gasped. Who's Denis? Ella's ex-boyfriend. I watched as Ella obviously froze. Clark seemed to be running and talking, a bit breathless. He was acting strange earlier, saying he wanted to prepare a wedding gift for you. And then he just disappeared. Sis, even though I promised Denis I wouldn't say anything, I really can't hold it in anymore today. You didn't answer my calls, so I had to use this way to let you know the truth. Bella froze. He never betrayed you. The court acknowledged wasn't taken by him. It was stolen by another employee from your company. He intentionally took the blame. Because Denis was diagnosed with leukemia back then. Stella stood still. At that time, his ex-wife threatened him, saying that if he didn't marry her, she would completely ruin your company. For those 5 years, he didn't live in luxury. He was abroad receiving treatment. Ella's expression was one of disbelief, as if struck by lightning. Sis, he truly sacrificed a lot for you. That Christ is malicious and doesn't deserve you. Do you know what he said to Denis? A crackling sound came as Clark turned on a recorder. From it came my cold, malicious voice. Ella suddenly turned to look at me. She had never looked at me with such sharp, questioning eyes before. I saw Denis. He is on the roof. Clark's voice trembled. He wants to jump. Ella seemed like she could barely stand. Ella? About that voice recorder, I grabbed her arm, wanting to explain myself. Ella shook me off, and I stumbled back, falling heavily to the ground. Ella? Her expression complicated, before turning away and leaving without a backward glance, ignoring the sympathetic and mocking gazes of those around me. I got up and chased after her. The thunderous roar erupted, and the clear sky suddenly poured with rain. I followed Dalla to the hotel rooftop, just in time to see her angled up with Denis. In the downpour, Denis looked unstable, while Ella, with red eyes, held him tightly from behind. Both of them were soaked to the bone. Are you not getting married? What are you doing here? I'm just a man who loves money. Ella, if you hate me, then I'll die in front of you. Before he could finish shouting, Ella forcefully turned his head, ran her fingers through his hair, then kissed him on tiptoe. It was a long 3 minutes. The sounds around me seemed to fade away, and I felt a choking sense of suffocation. I opened my mouth. Ella? It was as if an invisible barrier separated me from their world after enduring hardships. The main couple finally resolved their misunderstanding, and I was meant to retreat quietly. I don't know how long it took, but Ella suddenly looked up, noticed me beside them, and her face turned pale in an instant. She almost immediately pushed Denis away, but instinctively grabbed his arm when he exclaimed and nearly fell. I smiled sarcastically. Ella hurried over to me, holding her waiting dress. She was usually so calm. I had never seen her look so panicked. She stumbled a few steps in the short distance. Ella, congratulations. Your ex-boyfriend abandoned you for a reason. He was almost dying back then, so he had to make you hate him. You must be so happy. Now you can finally be together. I kept smiling. Cry. Ella's eyes brimmed with emotions, her pale lips trembling as if she wanted to say a lot, but only softly called my name. I took my phone from my bag and opened a recording. I came to tell you that the voice recorder was deliberately edited. This is the complete version of my conversation with Denis. He provoked me first, threatening to kill himself if I didn't give you up. I hate him, but I can't bear the false accusation of inciting someone to commit suicide. Yeah, Denis had called me, and to be safe, I recorded it. Ella turned sharply to Denis. His face changed slightly, revealing some panic. Ella, you know I love you too much. Besides, you just left him to run away from the wedding and kissed me in front of him. Doesn't that mean you've forgiven me? His blunt words acted like a sharp knife, reminding Ella directly of what she had just done. Ella froze, her eyes slowly turning red, and she reached out to touch me. Christ. I suddenly pulled away and slapped her hard. Don't touch me. It's disgusting. Watching the shock, pain, and regret rising in her eyes, I felt an unusual calmness. Almost dazed, memories flashed through my mind. A day I first met Ella. I had just withdrawn cash to pay for my mom's medical treatment when I stumbled upon my dad having a date with his mistress. My dad was furious and splashed a cup of coffee from the table into my face. Ella, passing by, blocked sticky coffee with her body. The boss kindly gave us some medicinal wine and cotton swabs, letting her tend to her wounds in the lounge while I waited outside and fell asleep. When I woke up, the restaurant was about to close. I remembered I had just taken out cash and hurriedly checked my bag, only to find that Ella hadn't left. She had even draped her coat over me. I can see you're holding on to that bag tightly even while sleeping. It must contain something valuable. It's crowded here. How could I wake you up? I can't just leave you alone here. She checked her phone, rubbing her forehead and saying, the weather is getting cooler. Next time. Was something warmer? A stranger's simple concern made my nose tingle. looking at the heavy stains on her coat. I took out my phone to offer to pay for it. Ella gently refused. No need. It's not expensive. I later found out that the coat was the only, most expensive designer piece she had specifically for business meeting. Afterward, I submitted my resume to her company. At that time, the company had just suffered a major blow, and she, as a woman, had to deal with clients and drink to the point of stomach bleeding. I realized her desire for success was almost obsessive, as if she needed to prove something to someone. Yet that day in the restaurant, she planned to secure investments for the company but stayed until closing time to help me watch my bag, an utter contradiction that made me curious. Then, I fell deeply in love. During the day, I accompanied her to drink with clients. At night, I rushed around the hospital taking care of her. I spent hours every day cooking soft millet porridge and lotus seed pork belly soup to nourish her stomach. The day she was discharged, I ended up in the hospital from overwork. Do you like me? I dumbly replied. You just noticed. Ella was taken aback, lowered her eyes, and smiled. I really am quite stupid. Later, she prepared a grand confession at her company and took me to the mall to pick out a suit I had long admired. Seeing my moved expression, she smiled. So easily satisfied? When the company goes public, I'll gift you a suit worth $1 million. I laughed and gently kissed her forehead, never expecting that the $1 million suit would later be destroyed by Denis, becoming a toll for her reconciliation with him. On our first night living together, her nails dug deep into my back as she dreamily whispered, "Don't ever leave me." In the middle of the night, I woke up to find her on the balcony, bathed in the deep black night, dressed in a cool silk camisole, with bangs hiding her delicate brows and eyes. She looked vulnerable and enchanting, unlike her usual calm and composed self. Looking back now, she must have missed Denis. Over the past 5 years, I've stood by her through countless setbacks and blows, never leaving her side. She also did everything a perfect girlfriend should do for me. But the moment Denis appeared, I lost everything. As I was leaving the rooftop, Ella grabbed my wrist, her voice pleading, "Don't go." This time, I didn't immediately pull away. I looked at her for a moment and then smiled gently. "Ella, we've been together for 5 years. I admire your talent, respect your perseverance and hard work, and I feel for your experiences. I love you and have never thought of leaving you, no matter what happens. But today, I suddenly realize that you're not worthy of me. In these 5 years, maybe you had some feelings for me, but in your heart, those feelings are too shallow, mixed with the need to alleviate loneliness and gratitude for being each other's company. Compared to the passionate love you had with Denis, it's not worth mentioning. But let me tell you, my love is equally sincere and fervent, and deserves genuine reciprocity. I just fell in love with the wrong person." Ella's face paled a bit, just silently looking at me with sadness. I pried her fingers apart slowly, my tone cold and ruthless. "You can't admit you still love your ex-boyfriend, yet you recklessly hurt your current boyfriend and refuse to let go. Ella, I looked down on you." I moved out quickly and temporarily stayed in a hotel. Ella didn't come looking for me these days. She must have decided to get back together with Denis, I thought. On the weekend, my mom texted me, asking me to come home. I just felt exhausted. 5 years ago, I gave my mom the evidence of my dad's affair, and she cried all night in my arms, deciding to get a divorce. I didn't expect my dad to be ruthlessly retaliated against by his mistress's husband, ending up paralyzed. That mistress didn't want him anymore, and he shamelessly came to plead with my mom, saying, "If you don't want me either, I might as well jump off a building and die." My mom was gentle and easily softened. After my dad's crying, tantrums, and threats, she actually agreed not to divorce him. Christ, he's your dad after all. I was so furious that I cried. What kind of dad is he? He's either hitting or scolding me, saying I'm a jink. And because of me, he went bankrupt. When I was 4, he and Grandma wanted to take me to drown in the river. That day in the restaurant, he splashed that boiling coffee right in my face. Did he really treat me as his son? My mom bit her lip, her face showing struggle and hesitation. "You're fine now. Your dad is like this. I looked at her and felt it was ridiculous. But even more, I felt cold. In this family. The day I moved out of the house was my birthday. And my mom called Ella over. Ella timidly begged from behind. You and Christ must be good to each other. Ella glanced at her. Of course. I will give him a home. That night, Ella made me a bowl of longevity noodles. Tears fell into the noodles as I, a grown man, cried until I could barely hold on. She doesn't want me anymore. I heard her say, I want you. At that moment, I thought Ella and I would have a home. A home that belonged only to us. Perhaps because I wasn't replying to texts, my mom called me. Just before I hung up, she said. I drove Liang Dong away. Liang Dong was my dad. While he was asleep, I had someone tie him up and send him back to his hometown. Why did you do that? For 5 years. You never contacted me. Never came to see me during holidays. Not even inviting me to your wedding. RUI. I really miss you. I was at the wedding that day. When you chased after Ella, I followed you. I was slightly taken aback. Ella hadn't noticed me following her, nor had I noticed her behind me. Mom saw everything. They used to record her to frame you. Saying she left Ying for another man and fled from the wedding. These past few days, Mama's been thinking about whether you would come looking for her, to vent your frustrations, but you've borne it all alone. Her voice began to tremble, and she sounded like she was crying. You've suffered so much but didn't say a word to anyone. Couldn't say anything at all. And then I sadly realized that you've always been like this since you were little. Others can be spoiled in their mother's embrace, but you swallow all your pain. I really feel like a failure as a mother. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know that if you're willing to trust me again. I didn't move to my mom's place, but I wouldn't intentionally distance myself from her anymore. Over the years, I saved a considerable amount of money and also had 10 of Ella's company shares. Enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life. I planned to find a suitable place to buy a house and give myself a home. One day after looking at houses and just arriving downstairs at an hotel, I noticed a few people pointing at me. Is he the Christ who's trending? He's quite handsome. From the photos, it seems he incited the bride's ex-boyfriend to commit suicide. I heard he was the one who broke them up back then. What a ruthless person. I immediately opened Weibo and found that what happened at the wedding had been recorded and posted online, complete with many fabricated truths about how I broke them up. The person who stole the court acknowledgement from Ella's company was turned in to me, and it claimed I colluded with Denis's ex-wife to break them up. Because the story was so twisted and dramatic, and gossipers quickly pushed it to trending topics, the whistleblower even used his real name. Denis. I didn't understand why he would do this. He had already gotten what he wanted. But a madman's way of thinking isn't something I could comprehend. So I chose to call the police right away. After taking my statement and returning, I was blocked downstairs at the hotel. Having been an ordinary person for so many years, aside from winning competitions and the day the company went public, it was the first time I was surrounded by so many paparazzi and flashes. A microphone was thrust right in front of me. Mr. Liang, it is said that 5 years ago, you threatened a leukemia patient, forcing him to break up with his girlfriend, and after he was cured, incited him to commit suicide. Is that true? Of course not. A familiar male voice came from behind the crowd. Everyone's gaze turned to Denis. He looked much haggard. His clothes wrinkled, and his condition was far from good. Christ is just a third party who meddles in other people's relationships. No matter how rich or powerful he is, I will bravely stand up today and expose his misdeeds. He repeated the fabricated words from the internet, and then provocatively glanced at me. Mr. Liang, the person involved has publicly accused you. What else do you have to say? I replied infuriately. To accuse someone, you need to present evidence. Without evidence, he's just spreading rumors. All right then. Do you have any evidence to prove you didn't do it? I coldly stared at the paparazzo. Just about to speak when a voice interrupted me. I can vouch for him. Denis's expression changed instantly. Despite having been calm, hearing her voice felt like waves crashing in on me, momentarily disorienting me. I looked up and met Ella's gaze. It had been a month since I last saw her, and she had lost a lot of weight. Her features sharpened, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. She stared at me, and seeing that I had no particular reaction, a hint of sadness flickered in her eyes. Isn't she the runaway bride from the video? Often in the financial news. Ella took out a document, her expression cold. This is Denis's medical diagnosis of leukemia from years ago. It's fake. I was completely stunned. Fake? Ella looked at me, her eyes filled with complexity. The day you revealed the truth about the recording pen, I began to doubt what he said. I took his diagnosis to an expert for verification. It's fake. In this past month, I used connections to reach out to the person he claimed stole the documents. And according to police investigations, that person did not commit any crime, and documents were stolen by Denis. I also contacted his ex-wife from prison for confirmation. She said that Denis used court technology as a bargaining chip to approach her, and she provided recordings from that time. I instinctively glanced at Denis, who was gripping his shirt tightly, embarrassed and enraged at having his lies exposed. It seemed true. Ella faced the reporters. Denis never had leukemia. He deceived everyone. I took out my phone and played the complete recording again. The crowd gasped. So, Denis did nothing but use the fake diagnosis to justify all his crimes? Though it sounds far-fetched. Such is human nature. Lies will only deceive those who choose to believe. I softly repeated this phrase in my heart. Smiling ironically, the tables had turned. Now the paparazzi and flashes surrounded Denis. Self-directed performance. Do you want to be famous? I thought carefully and realized that, given Denis's character, it was indeed possible, since he couldn't win Ella over. Seeking fame online would still be a way to make money, but he might be disappointed. Some onlookers were indignant, claiming you have leukemia. Aren't you afraid you'll actually get it? When others had no money, you looked down on them. Now that you've become wealthy, you unscrupulously break up other people's engagements. Truly shameless. Mistress, Denis was pushed back by the questioning, and his emotions suddenly intensified. Christ. Clearly, I was the one who knew her first. Clearly. She liked me for so long. Why can you suddenly come out on top? If it weren't for you, Ella and I wouldn't have ended up like this. I maintained a blank expression. Because you're greedy and vain, wanting to reap without sowing, you'll end up with nothing. Ellen, you being like this is all your own doing. Denis's face turned an extreme shade of pale, but he couldn't retort. Just then, a siren blared, and Denis froze for a second before turning and running toward the road, but he was quickly apprehended by the police. Spreading rumors, inciting online violence, stealing trade secrets. You will be out for at least 5 or 6 years. Alice said softly. I felt like laughing. The statute of limitations for stealing trade secrets is 5 years. You couldn't bear to sue Denis back then, but now you've decided to sue him 5 years later. Alice's face paled. Don't tell me it's for me. What if I said it was? A flicker of hope surfaced in her eyes. I smiled sarcastically, looking at her coldly. On the moment you ran away from the wedding, you severed all our possibilities. Ella, you don't love me, nor do you love him. You only love yourself. Don't come looking for me again. It disgusts me. In recent days, every time I went out to view property, I would see Ella standing downstairs with a large bouquet of roses. Sometimes it was a watch or a car. I smiled. Ella, don't forget, I have money. I can buy these things myself. Ella seemed not to hear. Her eyes raised. If you don't like these lifeless objects, I'll get you a puppy next time. I remember your birthday wish last year was for a puppy. We were just too busy. You were worried you wouldn't take care of it. I noticed you staring at that chibi inu when you walked past a pet store. It has round eyes and a gentle smile. I'll get that one for you. Okay? Clearly smiling gently, but she looked stubborn and obsessive. Clearly, you used to love the gifts I gave you, don't you understand? I liked your gifts before because I loved you. Now, I don't love you anymore. Ella's pupils constricted sharply, and after a few seconds, a layer of confusion crept into her eyes. Christ, I love you. I merely shot her a cold glance before turning to leave. It took nearly 3 months, but I finally obtained my property title. In the following months, I was busy finding designers, renovating, and buying furniture. By the time I actually moved into my new home, it had already been a year. During this year, Ella didn't come looking for me much. She was caught up in company infighting and was overwhelmed. I sold my shares to another 20 shareholder who was in competition with her, and I really didn't want to have any ties to her. My mom came over to help me clean and told me many things. She first said that my dad and grandma had been at odds in our hometown. My dad even got into a fight with my grandma while sitting in a wheelchair, almost leading to a serious incident. Then she shared some scandalous gossip about Ella. Ella's mom regained her senses a few days ago and revealed a shocking secret. She shouldn't have been that serious back then. It was because she learned something that made her angry. I was intrigued. What was it? Turns out Clark isn't her biological son. She had a stillborn baby during childbirth, and her husband, afraid she would be heartbroken, brought her another child. But in reality, Clark was the child of her husband and his mistress. Moreover, Clark has always known this. That is indeed scandalous. However, given her mom's vengeful nature, Clark probably wouldn't have a good life at home. There's one more thing. My mom hesitated. I understood. Did Denis really get leukemia? I remained calm, stroking the Shiba Inu's head. It's all over the internet. They say to be careful with our words and not to curse ourselves. The next time I saw Ella, I was walking my dog in the park downstairs with my new girlfriend, Darlene. Ella stood in the shadows of the tree, like a silent statue, staring at us intently. Here's the English translation. As soon as the Shiba Inu, Chai, saw Ella, it excitedly rushed over, spinning around her non-stop. Darlene glanced at Chai, her voice charming and soft. Your ex-mom? Ella looked at her expressionlessly, her already pale face showing an unusual pallor, making her look even colder. Darlene smiled and deliberately spoke at a volume just loud enough for the three of us to hear, leaning close to my ear. Christ, I'm going to buy some things. I knew she wanted me to clarify things with Ella, so I nodded. I watched Darlene leave, and when I turned back, Ella already walked over, silently gazing at me, her eyes deep as whirlpools. You bought that little dog? I said. Yes. I often went to the store to see it, so it remembers me. I know. Her eyebrows flickered slightly. I remember you said on Weibo that you named it Yuan. Darlene said Chai is more suitable. An eerie silence, like a tight cocoon, wrapped around us. Ella stood defiantly, silently watching me, unable to bear her overly cold gaze. I instinctively took a few steps back. Before I could react, Ella pushed me against the wall. She gazed deeply into my eyes, her cool palms cupping my face, as if to confirm that I was right in front of her. When she tiptoed closer, I suddenly dodged. I have a girlfriend? She squeezed out a strange cold laugh from her throat. Is she really your girlfriend? Christ? I was stunned for a few seconds. I already know. She's your friend and an asexual. You promised her to deal with your family's pressure to marry, to pretend to be her boyfriend for a month. So what if you know that? I looked at her calmly. Whether or not I have a girlfriend is none of your business, is it? How can it be none of my business? Christ, I love you. I don't love you. Ella's eyes darkened, her eyelashes quivering slightly as she suddenly changed the subject. Last year, you deliberately sold your shares to Christopher just to get in the capital to compete with me. Guess who won? Me or Christopher? It seemed she didn't need me to answer. She chuckled lightly. You won. I looked at her in confusion. Christ, I want to transfer all my shares and assets to you. She fixed her gaze on me. That way, I will have nothing left. Can you pity me a little and calm down? Are you crazy? Just consider me crazy. Ella moved in closer to kiss me, but I pushed her away forcefully. Ella paused for a moment, then calmly smiled. Does it make you feel better? Do you want me to hit you a few more times? I was indeed influenced. a surge of uncontrollable irritation rising in my heart. Ella, is this interesting to you? Ella quietly looked at me for a long time, trying to reach for my hand. Before she could touch me, I withdrew my hand behind my back. Her hand felt empty. Not immediately withdrawing. If I touch you now, you'll feel disgusted. Right? Seeing my silence, her eyes turned red. Christ. I shook my head, slowly pushing her away as if trying to shove her out of my world. Christ, please don't leave me, okay? It's too late. Ella, you don't love me. You just can't accept it. That's not true. Ella's eyes turned slightly red, filled with bottomless sadness. How could it just be reluctance? Christ, you are the best person to me in the whole world. I never told you, but I've always known my dad had a mistress. My mom also turned a blind eye because I looked like my dad. She never liked me. After Clark was born, she focused all her attention on him. She took us on a road trip. When Clark just said he was hungry, she rushed to carry him away, leaving me locked in the closed car for the whole hours. If it weren't for someone passing by, I might have suffocated. The day I met you, it felt like I was seeing the younger version of myself who stumbled upon my father's affair. You were just stronger and braver than I was. I didn't dare to smooth things over, to destroy the precarious peace that was barely holding our family together. Later, saying I would give you a home. I was serious. You always wanted a home, and so did I. When we were at our most difficult time, with all the funds trapped, we went to Beijing for investment. Without money for a hotel, we ended up at a 24-hour McDonald's. You ordered a pack of fries, letting me lie on your lap, saying you were allergic to potatoes and feeding all the fries to me. Later, I found out that was your favorite food. To maintain this lie, you didn't eat anything with potatoes for nearly a year until I came back early from a business trip and saw you had made a whole table of potato dishes for yourself. The more time I spent with you over the years, the more I loved. She paused, her brows revealing tight under regret. With Denis, I felt more of the resentment of being abandoned and the hatred of being betrayed. On the wedding day, I didn't know what was wrong with me. Hearing his reasons, hearing he wanted to commit suicide, hearing it was you who incited it, I regretted seeing you on the rooftop that day. For this past year, I haven't stopped regretting. I don't know what to do to make you forgive me. Christ, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. You only know how to say sorry. My vision blurred as I stared at the dark ground, my head in a chaotic mess, and my racing heart ached as well. Is it really that hard to be sincere? Christ, I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and took a deep breath. Ella, it's useless. At the party, you pretended to insult Denis, but your eyes never left him. You kept saying you hated him. Yet when danger struck, you rushed to him first. Later, you explained a lot to me, saying it was because I loved you and you were my only family. So you chose to trust me one more time. I've always had a clear vision of our future. I wanted to marry you, have children with you, all the family that belonged only to the two of us. But you should have seen that I was uncertain about this marriage. You assured me that even if Denis had his reasons, you would never waver. But what happened later? Ella? I looked at Ella with hate, and saw her guilt, sadness, and regret, an expression of being unable to change the past. But what was the point? The past couldn't be changed, and the hurt couldn't be taken back. All the grievances I had felt over the days finally erupted at that moment. You ran away on our wedding day. He didn't even show up. It was just someone else's word. And you abandoned me for him. That recording pen after being together for 5 years. Did you ever trust me? Do you remember how you looked at me then? You didn't even offer me an explanation. And later, you didn't even notice that I was behind you, kissing Denis in the pouring rain. You said it was Denis who deceived you. Lies only deceive those who choose to believe. Deep down in your heart, don't you hope Denis really had his reasons? So how can you expect me to believe you love me? I murmured. Ella, in these 5 years of loving you wholeheartedly, I couldn't be sure that you loved me. So now that I don't love you, how could I believe that you love me? Every time I see you, I think of the suspicion and questioning in your eyes. How you ran away on our wedding day. How you kissed Denis in front of me. Reminding me of how you betrayed me while saying you loved me. Ella's eyes turned red, tears silently rolling down her cheeks as she looked at me with sadness. Finally, I calmly said to her, Ella, let's let each other go. Forget me. If you meet another great guy in the future, all you need to do is one thing: forget me. Don't let someone else repeat my mistake. If I meet someone good in the future, I'll also forget you. Ella, you don't need to give me any shares. Let's just pretend we never met, and let's not see each other again. A long time passed. So long that I thought she wouldn't speak again, but Ella finally replied softly, you built this company from the ground up, and I will still give you that 10 share. If I could, I wish there were a drug that could induce amnesia, so we could freeze our memories of the day before the wedding. We were so close to getting married. I felt no stir in my heart, didn't look at her again, and turned to leave. In the gentle moonlight of the night, amidst the gaps of the bustling crowd, in moments of exchanged smiles, and every instance filled with affection, Ella and I had said I love you many times, treating each other as support and salvation. My love back then was sincere and passionate, wholeheartedly given. Her love, I don't know, perhaps she loved me at one time. Or perhaps she did. Now, none of that matters. I will live my life well and become my own hero.